Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking a very specific and pretty high-stakes mission, actually. We're talking about moving beyond just being highly proficient in English,
Yeah.
that comfortable band 7 or maybe band 8,
Mm.
and really targeting the absolute mastery needed for a band 9 in IELTS.
Yeah, that perfect score. It's not just about avoiding mistakes, is it? It's about control.
Mm,
It's demonstrating that linguistic flexibility and, well, crucially, having an idiomatic range. That's what signals native-like command. It's often the real difference between vocabulary that's just correct and vocabulary that feels natural and truly appropriate for the context.
exactly. So our deep dive today is going to be a really comprehensive, targeted look at 50 C2 level idioms and phrases. The goal for you, listening, is to really master the register, knowing which phrase to use in a formal essay, which ones fit into a more casual speaking task, and importantly, how to spot them easily when you're reading complex texts or listening.
hmm And we've basically synthesized the material into three key categories, and these map directly onto the IELTS modules. First, you've got those elevated academic and formal expressions, great for writing and the more complex speaking parts. Second, we'll look at conversational boosters. These are for that spontaneous fluency. And third, the really precise language for data and trends, which is essential for, objective analysis, especially in writing task 1. Honestly, if you can master these 50, you're signaling to the examiner across all 4 tests that you are operating at the highest level of English fluency.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Section 1, Academic and Formal Use. This is for writing task 2 and speaking part 3.
Right, the deep end.
Yeah, exactly. We're jumping into the language of analysis, critique, structure. These are the 20 or so phrases that can inject immediate sophistication, that academic weight, into your essays and your higher level speaking answers. And remember, the tone here has to be strictly formal or neutral. We're building the architecture, essentially, of a C2 argument.
Okay, so first up, analyzing trade-offs and consequences.
Right. Often an essay prompt will ask you to discuss something controversial, maybe weigh up different sides. You can't just take a simple stance.
No, Band 9 needs nuance. And the classic idiom for expressing that kind of balanced outcome is a double-edged sword.
That phrase is such a neat conceptual shortcut, isn't it? It means you don't have to write a long, clunky sentence like, well, this has benefits, but we also need to think about the downsides.
Precisely. So if you're discussing, say, the rise of remote work, you could state, while digital technology offers unprecedented geographic flexibility, it is ultimately a double-edged sword, potentially blurring the boundaries between professional and personal life, leading perhaps to exhaustion. It just immediately signals maturity in your argument, complexity of thought.
Yeah, it does. And building on that complexity, often we're discussing policy choices, things that require sacrifice. So if we're talking about resource allocation or economic priorities, maybe environmental damage, what's the phrase for that sacrifice?
You need at the expense of. This is critical for assigning cost, essentially. It helps you transition from talking about a benefit to revealing a hidden drawback. Think about a task 2 essay on urbanization. You could say something like, many developing nations pursue rapid industrial expansion at the expense of preserving historical architecture, or even at the expense of local community stability. That structure, at the expense of, is very formal, very precise.
Okay, and when we're analyzing negative consequences,
Yeah.
we need to move beyond simple words like harm or damage. How do we talk about a gradual but still significant negative impact?
We use take a toll on. This is much better because it implies a kind of cumulative damage, often psychological or physical, that builds up over time. Think about the chronic societal pressure, maybe, to achieve academic perfection. You could argue this sustained expectation can eventually take a toll on the emotional well-being and creativity of young people. It just carries more weight. It sounds more profound than simply saying it damages their health.
Right, it implies that slow burn effect. Okay, so we've talked about consequences. Now, how about contextualizing problems? The scope of an issue. If the specific problem you're discussing is really only a small part of a much bigger crisis, how do you signal that wider context?
You use the tip of the iceberg. This is vital for showing the examiner you grasped the breadth of the topic. So if a rating passage talks about, say, local unemployment rates, and you need to summarize how severe it is, you might note that this local issue is merely the tip of the iceberg when it comes to national or even global employment instability. It suggests you're aware there are deeper structural issues, even if you don't list them all right then.
Good one. Okay, and for describing things that are being investigated or closely examined, new data, government actions, research methods, we need formal language. What's the phrase?
Under scrutiny, it conveys that kind of rigorous, formalized examination. If you're discussing scientific research in an essay, you could say, any new pharmaceutical compound must remain under scrutiny by international regulatory bodies for, say, a minimum of 5 years before wide distribution. It's a world away from just saying someone is checking it out, isn't it? It immediately fits that formal academic register.
Definitely. And when we assign significance, like in a policy discussion or maybe historical analysis, how do we replace very important with something more high impact?
You'd say it plays a pivotal role. This really elevates the language when you're discussing influence or importance. For instance, the availability of high-speed internet must play a pivotal role in modern educational strategies. Otherwise, digital disparities will inevitably worsen. It positions the subject as essential to the outcome. That's a common rhetorical move in C2 writing.
Okay, moving into mechanisms, standards, and evaluation. Let's talk about linking processes and goals. When the method used to get a result is maybe less important than the result itself, particularly in philosophy or ethics, what's the idiom?
A means to an end. Yeah, this distinction between the method and the goal is crucial for complex arguments. You might say, for some policymakers, increasing GDP is viewed merely as a means to an end. The ultimate end being perhaps improved public welfare, even if the methods used to boost GDP cause some temporary social disruption. Using that phrase shows you understand ethical framing. It separates your analysis from simpler discussions.
Right. And in speaking part 3, the examiner often asks you to evaluate options, compare things. We need a smooth way to introduce that evaluation.
The classic structure is weigh the pros and cons. It's essential for rhetorical structure, really. It signals to the examiner, okay, I'm about to present a balanced discussion, and it often comes just before you give your conclusion. For example, before committing vast public resources to space exploration, governments must diligently weigh the pros and cons regarding immediate societal benefits versus long-term scientific knowledge.
Makes sense. Now, when a decision made now affects the future, especially in law or regulation or even societal norms, what's the term?
Set a precedent. This idea of future standards is indispensable for so many IELTS topics. If a global court rules that major data protection breaches must carry criminal penalties, that ruling instantly sets a precedent for future cases about digital liability all over the world. It shows you're thinking about the systemic implications of a single action.
Got it. And for comparative essays, where you need to make a clear distinction between two related but different ideas, how do we formally separate them?
You need to draw a line between them. This is often used when defining things. So in an essay about journalism, you might argue that it's crucial to draw a line between objective reporting and, say, opinion editorializing in order to maintain ethical standards. It shows sharp analytical thinking.
Okay, and you mentioned this earlier, but it's so important for C2 coherence. Let's revisit it.
Yeah.
By the same token.
Yes, it's such a powerful formal connector. It essentially means for the same reason, or similarly. It's a really high-level cohesive device. It binds related arguments together much more smoothly than just using also or and. For example, if you argue that standardized tests provide measurable results, you could then say, by the same token, they often fail to account for the diversity of learning styles or non-academic intelligence. It lets you keep the argument flowing while shifting the perspective slightly.
Excellent. Now let's handle surprise, disclosure, and failure in a formal context. When important, perhaps hidden, facts are revealed.
We use come to light. It's got that formal feel of disclosure. So, discussing an investigation, you might write, only after a lengthy internal review did evidence of financial mismanagement finally come to light. It feels serious, formal, totally different from casually saying, someone spilled the beans.
Right. And if those revelations cause surprise or disapproval, especially among people who are informed or expecting something different,
then they raise eyebrows. This is a fantastic C2 metaphor, very sophisticated. It lets you critique indirectly, like, the proposal to fund a new motorway by diverting funds intended for public health care is certain to raise eyebrows among community leaders and opposition parties. It implies that shock or disapproval without you having to state your personal opinion too bluntly.
very useful. Now, what about discussing a failure of ethical oversight? When someone should have noticed something but didn't, maybe intentionally.
Ugh, that's turn a blind eye. It's powerful because it implies intentional neglect. It carries an ethical judgment. When discussing, say, global supply chains, you often hear accusations that major corporations intentionally turn a blind eye to dangerous or unethical working conditions in overseas factories, all to maximize profits. It directly links that lack of action to a moral choice.
Okay. And finally, for a formal critique of performance or Maybe policy outcomes that didn't meet goals.
You'd say they fall short of expectations. This is the measured, professional way to critique, much better than just saying, it failed.
Hmm.
You might use this in your Task 2 conclusion. Despite aggressive spending and clear government targets, the National Literacy Campaign ultimately fell short of expectations in achieving its 5-year goals.
Good. And before we move to the next section, let's quickly reinforce 3 phrases that are just essential for framing those common socioeconomic Task 2 essays. We mentioned them. In the long run, widen the gap and make ends meet.
Yes, absolutely critical. If an essay asks about financial struggles, saying it's hard to make a living is okay, maybe B2 level. But saying that many low-income families struggle to make ends meet, that's C2. Talking about inequality, don't just say richer and poorer, use widen the gap between rich and poor. And when discussing future impacts or benefits, in the long run, using these demonstrates a deep engagement with common IELTS themes. Very important.
Okay, perfect. Now let's completely switch gears. Section 2. Conversational use for speaking and listening.
Right, forget the formal stuff for a moment.
Yeah, these next 20 idioms are all about making your speaking sound effortless, natural, rhythmically fluent. This is vital for getting high marks in speaking parts 1 and 2, and also for understanding spontaneous chat in the listening module. The tone here is relaxed, neutral to informal.
And remember, fluency isn't just about speaking quickly, it's using these idiomatic chunks without hesitation. When you use these phrases naturally, you're showing you can slip into that native speaker's default conversational mode.
Okay, first area, discussing work, effort, and sometimes avoidance. If the examiner asks you about a time you studied really hard or worked intensely, you need something better than just, I worked hard.
You need burn the midnight oil. It's a great evocative image. If that Part 2 cue card asks you to describe a difficult challenge, you could say, preparing for that final exam was brutal. I often had to burn the midnight oil, staying up past 2 a.m. just to finish the readings. Adds color to your story.
Yeah, definitely. And for stopping work, just naturally finishing up.
Call it a day. Simple, functional, everyone understands it. You could use it in a Part 1 answer about your daily routine. I usually start work pretty early, but by about 5 p.m., I'm generally ready to call it a day and maybe head to the gym.
Okay, now moving to shortcuts or doing things poorly. If you're discussing why something failed because someone didn't put in enough effort or care,
then they probably cut corners. This is essential for talking about standards or lack thereof. If the examiner asks about quality in modern services, you might say that, well, certain budget airlines seem to often cut corners on things like maintenance or staffing, which, ultimately jeopardizes the customer experience. It links the action cutting corners to the consequence poor service.
What about conversational evasion? In the listening test, sometimes you hear someone trying to avoid answering a question directly. What's the phrase we listen for?
They're likely beating around the bush. So if you ask someone a direct question like why they quit their job and they start talking about the weather or their cat, they're beating around the bush. Recognizing that phrase in a dialogue is really key to understanding the underlying tension or maybe conflict in that conversation, which often comes up in listening section 3.
Good point. And let's quickly link back to our formal section for contrast. If formally we said a government was under scrutiny, how would we casually say someone's in trouble?
They'd be in hot water. It's the perfect informal equivalent. If you were late submitting your big assignment, you'd probably be in hot water with your professor. And being able to consciously choose the right phrase for the right setting, that is exactly what the Band 9 score reflects, that control over register.
Okay, second area here. Describing uncertainty, opportunity, and reactions. For plans that aren't finalized, especially in Part 1 about your future.
Use up in the air, highly natural. My post-graduation travel plans are completely up in the air right now. I'm still waiting to hear back from a couple of universities. Concise conveys uncertainty perfectly.
And describing regret. Missing an opportunity because the timing was off.
You missed the boat. Simple as that.
Right.
If you didn't buy those concert tickets right away, well, you missed the boat. The show's sold out now. It's an immediate, easily understood expression of regret. Great for building fluency in your spoken answers.
Okay. What about nervousness just before doing something important? Part 2 often asks for personal stories. What's a good phrase for that feeling?
Get cold feet. It's superb for anecdotes. You might tell a story about almost backing out of a major presentation or maybe a public performance because just moments before going on stage, you suddenly got cold feet. It lets you express quite a powerful emotion, vulnerability even, in a very natural, idiomatic way.
And what if someone acts too soon? Makes a mistake because they rushed.
They jumped the gun. This applies really well to planning errors or maybe poor decisions made in haste. For example, my friend decided to invest heavily in that new tech stock before really researching the company properly. He definitely jumped the gun and, unfortunately, lost quite a bit of money.
Ouch. Okay, third area. Secrets, truth, and understanding. Secrets come up a lot in dialogues. What are those two common conversational options for revealing one?
Right. We have let the cat out of the bag and also spill the beans. They're pretty much interchangeable in conversation. Both mean revealing a secret, often unintentionally. So, in listening, if you hear a character say, "Oh no, I accidentally spilled the beans about the surprise party," you immediately know crucial, guarded info has just been revealed. Recognizing those signals helps you track the narrative.
Definitely. Now, when you completely agree with someone, especially if they've just summed up a complex idea perfectly,
Yeah.
how do you give them that top-tier idiomatic praise?
You say they hit the nail on the head. This phrase is exceptionally high impact, very positive. If the examiner makes a really insightful point about, say, educational funding in part 3, you could respond, "That truly hit the nail on the head. You've absolutely identified the core issue there." Shows strong agreement and appreciation.
Great. And for describing the process of trying to understand something complicated, maybe a technical subject or a difficult concept.
We use wrap your head around. It's great for describing that intellectual effort involved. It took me weeks to finally wrap my head around the new software update. Or maybe the economic data was so complex, I really struggled to wrap my head around all the implications.
Yeah, I've been there. And to demonstrate that crucial C2 skill of critical evaluation, not just accepting everything you hear as absolute truth.
You need to take it with a grain of salt. This shows measured judgment, a bit of healthy skepticism. If you're discussing media coverage and speaking part 3, you can mention that while some news reports can be quite sensationalized, it's generally wise to take the initial claims with a grain of salt until they're verified by multiple reliable sources. It's a sophisticated way to show balanced thinking.
Excellent. We also need phrases for emotional expression and assertiveness in conversation. How do we express extreme happiness?
You'd say you're on cloud 9. Much better than just very happy. When I finally got that job offer after months of searching, honestly, I was on cloud 9 all week. And for assertiveness, we use speak your mind. That means saying what you truly think, even if it might be unpopular. Useful for showing confidence in expressing opinions in part 3.
Okay, last conversational area, social interaction and decision-making. Starting a conversation in a new group, maybe when people are a bit reserved.
The common phrase is break the ice.
Right. So if you're asked about social events in part 1, you could say something like, "I find telling a short, appropriate joke is usually a good way to break the ice at a professional networking event."
And to clearly pass responsibility or signal that a decision is now up to someone else.
Ah, the metaphor.
The ball is in your court. It's excellent for summarizing negotiations or planning. Okay, we've discussed our initial proposal in detail. Now the ball is in their court to decide how they want to proceed. Shows clear structure in communication.
Perfect. And finally, a key skill for listening. Telling the difference between literal statements and jokes or teasing.
Right, that's pull someone's leg. It signals that the speaker is just joking. If a character in a dialogue says, "Don't worry, I was just pulling your leg about those terrible exam results," the listener knows immediately to disregard the terrible results part and interpret it as humor. It prevents misunderstanding the actual facts being conveyed.
Crucial for comprehension. And one last quick but really useful conversational one. Keep an eye on.
Yes, means to monitor or watch carefully. Super common. "Could you just keep an eye on the oven for me while I take this quick phone call?" Simple, necessary, perfectly fluent.
Fantastic. Okay, that covers the conversational side. Now let's move to our final and maybe most technically crucial category. Section 3, data and trends.
Right, this is the language of precision. You absolutely need this for describing graphs and charts and writing task 1, and also for understanding quantitative findings in academic reading passages. Remember, these 10 phrases are technical and formal.
And in task 1, the examiner isn't just checking if you got the numbers right, are they?
Not at all. They're looking at your vocabulary range when you describe change. Just repeating increased, increased, increased will definitely cap your score. You need variety.
Okay, so let's start with describing increases, rapid ones or consistent ones. We need different ways to phrase this.
Yes, you need to distinguish. A dramatic, sudden rise, that's a surge in. A consistent, ongoing rise is often described as being on the rise, or maybe following an upward trajectory. A good C2 writer might actually use all 3 in one report to show variety.
Okay, so how would that look in a Task 1 report sentence?
You could write something like, following the introduction of the tax incentive, there was a surge in new business registrations in the first quarter. And although the pace slowed slightly afterwards, overall sales maintained an upward trajectory for the subsequent 2 quarters. See, it shows control over describing different speeds and types of increase.
Very clear. Conversely, for a consistent decrease was the standard phrase.
A downward trend, clear, formal, objective. It summarizes the directional movement nicely. If you see a line graph dropping steadily from, say, 2005 to 2010, you'd report that the figures indicated a downward trend in, perhaps, fossil fuel consumption during that period.
And for the absolute highest point reached on a graph.
That's where it reached a peak. This marks that critical turning point you often see on charts. Tourist numbers reached a peak in July, recorded at 1.5 million visitors, before declining sharply in the month of August.
Okay, and what if the data is all over the place? Highly unpredictable, like maybe stock prices during a crisis or volatile market sentiment.
Then you'd say it fluctuated wildly. This tells the examiner immediately that the data wasn't stable or predictable. The national unemployment rate during the period of political crisis was observed to fluctuate wildly from month to month, defying any stable analysis or easy prediction.
Got it. Now, graphs don't always show movement. Sometimes things stay the same. When a figure remains consistent, what's the phrase for stability?
It remains steady, essential for making comparisons in Task 1, for example. While the consumption of coffee increased dramatically over the period, the consumption of tea remained steady throughout the entire decade, hovering around approximately 15 million tons annually.
And what happens when growth stops, levels off, but doesn't necessarily drop right away?
That's when the figures hit a plateau. This describes that point of saturation or perhaps stagnation. After several years of aggressive growth following its launch, the company's annual revenue figures suddenly hit a plateau in 2020 and failed to increase further in the following year.
Okay. Finally, let's talk about relationships between variables. This is crucial for reading comprehension, especially with academic studies, and also for more analytical Task 1 summaries. We have show a correlation, depict a pattern, and demonstrate consistency.
Yes, and the really key insight here for a C2 candidate is understanding the difference between correlation and causation. This is vital. Many IELTS reading passages summarize research findings. If the text says, the research findings show a correlation between early retirement and higher reported levels of life satisfaction, what does that actually mean?
It means they tend to happen together,
Right.
but not necessarily that one causes the other.
Exactly. And why is it so important for a Band 9 candidate not to jump to causation in their Task 1 summary or their reading analysis?
Because assuming causation, saying, that early retirement causes satisfaction based only on correlation, is a logical fallacy. It undermines that objective academic reporting style you need.
Precisely. C2 language demands that precision. We use show a correlation to report the observed link neutrally without overstating the claim. Similarly, using phrases like depict a pattern or demonstrate consistency in Task 1 elevates your writing because you're analyzing the nature of the data itself, not just listing off the numbers. These phrases signal you understand statistical language and its limitations.
That really deepens the technical aspect, doesn't it? Knowing not just how to report the data, but how to report the relationship accurately. That feels like true C2 mastery.
It absolutely is.
Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground. We aimed for 50 C2 level idioms across those essential contexts.
Yeah.
Formal arguments, natural conversation, and precise data description. I think we hit our mission.
Yeah, and the ultimate takeaway, as we kept emphasizing, is mastering appropriateness. Register. Think again about the difference between using that precise formal phrase, turn a blind eye in an essay about corporate ethics, versus saying someone's being evasive by beating around the bush in a casual chat and speaking part 1. That linguistic control, knowing which tool to use when, that's the hallmark of a Band 9 score.
And just as a final quick review, make sure you consciously try to integrate those 3 high-impact phrases for common IELTS themes. Make ends meet for finance talk, in the long run for looking at future consequences, and widen the gap when discussing social inequality.
Right. Now, the crucial part, application. Knowledge only turns into C2 fluency if you actively practice. So here's a challenge for you, the listener, to really cement these concepts and start applying them.
Okay, challenge 1, academic integration. Choose 3 idioms from section 1, maybe pick, say, set a precedent by the same token, and a double-edged sword. Now, draft a single paragraph for a Task 2 essay. Topic: government regulation of social media. Force yourself to use all three of those terms logically and cohesively within that one paragraph.
Good one. Challenge 2. Fluency check. Select 2 conversational idioms from Section 2, perhaps on Cloud 9, and wrap your head around. Now, record yourself answering a Speaking Part 2 prompt, maybe one about receiving some unexpected news. Listen back critically. Did those phrases sound natural, spontaneous, or did they sound memorized? Use them to express complex emotion and that intellectual effort.
And challenge 3, precision report. Find any line graph online showing some historical economic data. Anything will do. Right, just a short 4-sentence summary for task 1. Your goal is to use a surgeon, remain steady, and hit a plateau correctly. Focus purely on objective description and demonstrating that vocabulary variety.
Perfect. And the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. The real power of a C2 idiom is that it functions as conceptual shorthand. It's more than just vocabulary. If you can swap a long, slightly clumsy explanation like, well, something seemed bad at first, but actually it resulted in a good outcome later on, if you can swap all that for the simple, culturally understood phrase, it was blessing in disguise, you're doing more than using advanced words.
What are you signaling then?
You're signaling to the examiner that you fully command the language's underlying culture and its conceptual structure. So your challenge isn't just to memorize the definitions we discussed today, it's to internalize the intent behind each phrase, understand the idea it shortcuts to.
Go forth, command that intent, and secure that Band 9. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.